standing up so people can never hear me, and especially with my mask on. I think people should know that this is a live stream meeting. I don't know if Josh started the live stream yet, but yeah, you're on YouTube. So, yeah, know that. So we're calling to order at 6:02 p.m. and we'll have confirmation of, I think a sheet went around for attendance and voting. Hopefully, I haven't seen it make its way back yet, but you have just, you got it, so you know who's here. I don't need to vote. Okay, thank you. Very good. So our first agenda is just ask people to approve the vouchers that have gone around via DocuSign. Hopefully everyone is approving any vouchers that come around. I don't think one went out today yet, but I think, is it, there was one last week, yeah, so I don't know, but just keep your eyes perked to your email for any of those. Now our next thing is public comment, and I know I received a public comment, which will be, well, it's short, so I can just read it. But was there any public comment we received?
Yes.
Yeah.
Celine, it's been attached to the agenda, correct? Anything that we received in writing? Yep. So it's linked to the agenda.
Okay, so did you link in the email that came from you, or shall I just read that?
That's included.
That's included. Okay, so it's included in the agenda, and that's you can access that on our website. Is that right? And I'm wishing to read that, and hopefully, board members, you will check those out and read those public comments. I think Susan was going to read some public comment, and then I'll open it up to public comment from the members of the other members of the public who are here. Or should I go ahead?
I've done it. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. I also, not also mumble, but I mumble. So, all right. This is, I'm reading a letter from Ingrid Cashman. Dear John and Mark, it is with deep regret that I am submitting to you my resignation from the Southwest Charter Pemmistick Elementary School Board. After 13 years of service to my community in the school district, I no longer feel I can do the job I was elected to do. As a board member, I worked hard on behalf of our schools, communities, staff, and students to ensure we have a top-performing school district and that the staff who worked within our district felt supported and valued. I believe most school board members run for these positions because they value education and they want to support the school systems within their communities. That support extends to the students and their families, teachers, ed techs, custodians, bus drivers, administrators, and anyone else who helps our schools operate effectively. Over the last two rounds of contract negotiations, I've seen a shift away from the practice of open communication between all negotiators during the bargaining session. The days of being able to openly discuss a topic no longer exist, as the teachers have chosen to have one speaker who mainly responds to questions with vague, memorized responses. There will never be substantive, meaningful dialogue between both sides until all parties in the room speak freely and openly about the topics on the table. I'm resigning from the board because of the prohibitive practices complaint filed by the Teachers Association. The complaint is a complete misrepresentation of the facts of our meetings, is malicious in its content, and aligns the school board negotiators. I take this complaint personally, and I can no longer devote countless hours of my time to support a system that doesn't recognize the lasting damage this type of behavior can have on our district. As school board members, we walk a fine line between our schools and communities, advocating for the most resources we can get for our schools while not pushing our communities too far and thereby losing support for our schools. One only needs to look to trend to see how tenuous that balancing act can be. I'm proud of our school districts, the initiatives we've started, and the leadership role we have played in the state. I will always be an advocate for our schools and their budgets. My support will now be from the other side of the table. Sincerely, Ingrid Cashman.
Thank you, Susan. Is there other public comment? Right?
Yes.
What's that?
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
like to.
Okay, go for it.
Do you have a question first? Well, I was wondering if any more of the ones that were submitted into the record are going to be read prior to the public.
They are linked in the agenda. That one actually wasn't linked in the agenda as far as I'm aware. Yeah. That one. Oh, what? Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, okay.
Why, can you clarify why they're not read aloud? Is that not a requirement?
You know what? I'll just read them aloud. Here we go. Thank you. Let me just pull them up.
I have them just getting one minute.
Sure. Do you want to start while I pull them up?
Sure.
You can read one and I'll read one.
Dear MDI RSS school board members, we are writing in support of the teachers in AOS 91. We are longtime residents and taxpayers in the town of Southwest Harbor. Our children attended and graduated from Island Schools, Pematic and MDIHS, and have gone on to have successful and happy lives. 2 of them are teachers. Much of their success has been thanks to the professional and devoted educators here on Mount Desert Island. I had the honor of working with many of these outstanding teachers while I worked at Pematic and then taught at the high school for 25 years. Over that time, I witnessed teachers who spent hours and days preparing for and assessing their courses outside of the school hours, days, and during vacations. I saw teachers who continually honed their craft, helped each other, and inspired their students. I saw devoted individuals pay for supplies, materials, and field trips. In the parking lots on Saturday and Sunday, you could find cars of teachers working to support and engage their students either in their own class preparation or providing the best in extracurricular activities. I have worked in other school systems. This is not the norm. This is the exception. And can we even begin to imagine and appreciate the work, creativity, and flexibility of our teachers during the COVID pandemic? Essential workers, the first line, community heroes, remember? These heroes should not be working without a contract. The increase in local taxes will be worth keeping our outstanding staff here. Most of the teachers live elsewhere and leave their own community to teach in ours. The board should not ignore this fact. There has to be a good incentive for them to continue to sacrifice time and energy and money to commute to our schools. We are standing in support of all of our teachers and urge you to support them too. Kathleen and Paul Slack, Southwest Harbor. And then there's one more short one. You want me to just read that?
I can read it.
Okay.
I would like to express my sincere belief that the teachers in our district should be given a raise in their new contract. If the past year and a half has taught us anything, it's that teachers fill a tremendous role in keeping them on track with their education and personal growth. I am willing to have my taxes increased to fund a raise in their contract. Please consider all that educators have gone through and what an important factor they have on our island kids' lives. Stephanie Reese, town officer. Okay, I think that's. No, I'm not aware of it.
I actually had one come to me on Facebook that I had encouraged her to send it to the board email and thought she was going to, but and I'm trying to remember what her last name is. It's Megan
Smith.
Megan Smith, thank you. Which was also in support of raising taxes to support the teachers.
Okay. So, thank you. Matt, did you want to go and then I'll.
Yeah, but are you guys gonna give public comment on that stuff? I'm gonna talk about COVID. I don't want to break the momentum up. You gotta speak here.
So is there public comment amongst,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Do you have a order or I'll let you handle it?
Have at it.
So public comment from Daniel Horning representing Rhode Island Association.
Speak up, Dan, or I just want to make sure.
We would like to submit the following public comments. We undersigned teachers, librarians, school nurses, guidance counselors, and speech language clinicians employed by school districts across AOS 91 are united for a fair contract that establishes a fair salary scale to attract and retain quality staff to support the education of our community children, maintains affordable health insurance for all bargaining unit members, ensures a fair grievance process that will keep administration accountable and allow contract disputes to be settled at the lowest possible level, protects the working conditions in the event that there's expiration of the contract. Bargaining unit members have been working under very difficult conditions in the midst of this pandemic. It's only right that they're provided with a contract commensurate with the value of that important work that they do.
Thank you. I'll present this to you. Thank you. Just gonna put it right here. Thank you. Is there more?
I have a comment.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm Kristen Braun. I'm first grade teacher at Trenton Elementary. I also have a son who attends Mount Desert Island High School. What I want to tell you is teaching is among the most noble professions. And more than ever, people recognize that due to the pandemic for a couple of reasons. We saw student achievement decline immediately upon the inability of students to receive in-person instruction from teachers in classrooms. And understandably, parents and caregivers had a really hard time fulfilling the role of teacher during remote learning. And that makes perfect sense because we're highly trained individuals. Many of us have advanced degrees. In addition to that, it's a really tough job. Not just anyone can step in and do what we do. And I found, especially during pandemic times, there's a lot of verbal praise for what teachers do because our work is so important. Everyone seems to agree our work is so important. And you know, important work should receive praise, but it should also, we should also be receiving appropriate financial compensation for that important work. By and large, the area we serve is economically sound, and it's wrong to deny teachers just compensation considering the important service we provide all of our community's children. And I just want to end by saying, after the many demands of a day teaching, teachers should be home right now, taking care of their families, taking care of themselves, prepping for tomorrow, so we can be refreshed and ready for another demanding day of teaching your children, which we love. It's hard work, but we love it. And that is where we should be, but we're not. We're here fighting for what is rightly ours. And that fact, that alone, that right there is, it makes me sad to say it. It's an unfortunate stain on this district that otherwise has so many great attributes. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
I've got one if you guys are all done.
It's hard for me to see in the back, so go ahead, Matt.
Okay, I'm gonna jump up front here. Just like to see how many people are here and really get my heart rate going. I've been coming to as many school board meetings as I could make it to lately, and as my kid approaches early graduation from the high school, I'm starting to feel like, okay, she's probably not gonna have to be getting a vaccine in order to graduate from the high school. So now I'm thinking about what's next, you know, her trip to Maui. What's that gonna be like for an unvaccinated person? Or is she gonna get accepted to a college that requires her to get vaccinated? None of which is what I intended to talk about, so I'm gonna get back to the notes here. At the last AOS 91 meeting, we heard a presentation from Dr. J.R. Krebs. I asked the board for permission to ask one or two questions during the presentation, and my request was denied, which I believe was a missed opportunity. The first question that the board asked Dr. Krebs was, how do we increase the vaccination rate at our schools? You had a doctor here, and the first question you asked him was about sales tactics. If I was allowed to participate in those discussions, I could have helped ask some more appropriate questions, and I could have also helped to increase vaccination rates, which I'll volunteer here. All you got to do is get a famous musician to come to town to have a concert and only let vaccinated people. That's all it would take for my kid. She told me that herself. I'm troubled by the school board actively trying to increase the vaccination rate in our schools. That should be the concern of each individual student, their parents, and the family doctors. how would you feel about me trying to convince your kids not to get vaccinated? You don't have to worry about that. And I wish I didn't have to worry about you doing the opposite. I know that you all have a lot on your plates right now, and I appreciate you taking the burden of school board member. I encourage you all to lighten your workload by forgetting about trying to get more students vaccinated. I'm still hoping that you will each take the time to meet with me outside of these school board meetings so we can have an actual conversation and get to better understand each other. And I can tell you from the few people that have reached out to me and met with me either in person or via email, it's just gone so well. And I can't caution you enough to don't assume anything about anybody these days. I think we're all conditioned to think that based on what this person wears or what flag they got flying in the yard, we know a million other things about that person. And it's just not the case. And I've been very pleasantly surprised to find out that people that I thought were totally for forcing my kid to get vaccinated to be a student here, were actually against it. And I never would have guessed it based on first impressions. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Matt. Is there any other public comment? Okay. Hearing none, I will move on to approval of minutes. I think we can take them in a slate, probably 18th October 2021 regular meeting and 25th October 2021 special meeting. Is there a
Move to approve.
okay, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? You get that? That was quick. Yeah, okay. That brings us to reports and updates. So I'll turn it over to Mark for his superintendent update and recommendations regarding COVID mitigation strategies.
Thank you, Jessica. Hopefully the board did receive a preliminary. I sent that out earlier today. I'd like to just give a brief overview of the process we used, and then I can get into the actual bullet points and then take any questions that the board members might have, or if anybody that participated in those discussions would like to add anything, we can also entertain that. We met, as the board knows, we had a very tight timeline, and my charge was to look at how we could increase mitigation strategies for COVID, and also the potential consideration of whether or not the board could in fact employ a vaccination mandate for staff and for students. So there's some various questions to be vetted legally. There were 13 individuals that served over 2 nights. We met in a 2-week period. Again, we had a very tight timeline to come back and bring some recommendations here to the board. And so I invited Brian Henkel from the board, and Robin Sue and Jessica participated to represent the board. Dr. Crevens from the hospital, Chrissy McGuire, the CEO from the hospital. Many of you may know Charlie Ray. Charlie's a former board member, parent. He's also a scientist in charge of education at the Jackson Laboratory. Crystal DeGrasso, one of our principals, and Crystal also is doing work with our nurses on a regular basis. Julie Kablinski, Director of Teaching and Learning, 7 to 12. Matt Haney, the high school principal. Melissa Bishop, the nurse at Connors Emerson. Wanda Fortin, Director of Teaching and Learning, pre-K through 6, and myself. So we met, and Selena, if we haven't linked the notes, I'm going to send that to you, but I want to make sure that's part of the public record so that everybody can see. I believe the board has those, but those notes, I think we'll be able to drill down into, or they will drill down into our discussion and the information that we reviewed. So I want that to be able to be shared publicly. At the end of the day, I think that recommendations I'm going to provide to you really, I think they encapsulate much of what we're doing. And I want to be careful as I say this, but for some folks with our COVID mitigation strategies, it's not enough. And for others, it's too much. And each day we walk that line. I can't tell you the number of emails I've received from teachers, from staff, from students, from parents on both sides of this equation. Each and every one of them is very impactful, and it's very appreciated to have that perspective. So in sum, my recommendations are as follows, and then we can get into any questions or discussions you might have. First recommendation I have is to recommend and advise all employees throughout AOS 91, inclusive of all staff, full and part-time, become fully vaccinated against COVID-19. As required by the OSHA law scheduled to take effect on January 4th, 2022. And I will pause there, and I'm fully aware that will be looked at and reviewed. So obviously that is that remains to be seen how that law may take effect, what may happen with that. So that recommendation is tempered with that piece. Again, before I move on, this is a federal law, and the way the law is written, and we've vetted this with our attorney, is that this would impact organizations of 100 or more. Now, the question is common, it's been asked of me, who would that impact? Obviously, our high school, no question, would that impact the entire AOS? And I've asked that question legally. I've reviewed that with my group. The way we're interpreting that is that it would in fact involve the entire AOS, all of our employees, for the following reasons. We look at a number of things as a district, our common calendar, our policies, our insurance rates, our safety plans, collective bargaining agreements. Thank you, Jessica. So a number of those entities we work in unison. So we would interpret that to be a district perspective. Obviously, we can vet that further legally, but I just want to make sure people were aware that we are considering that. The second recommendation is to recommend and advise all employees who are not fully vaccinated against COVID-19 participate in pool testing as may be permitted by statute. And again, we believe that through legal opinion that we can in fact do that, but we would certainly, if that was the will of the board, would want to meet and consult with our associations and our employees to make sure they were well aware of the impact and the things that we needed to do to support that if the board were to mandate that. And obviously making sure we were aligned with statute. The third recommendation, as advised by legal counsel, the AOS board can likely impose a vaccination mandate for students, as Maine state statute permits boards to adopt more stringent vaccination requirements than state law has. However, and this is from the attorney points out this is a political, not a legal issue, and as such, the board should carefully weigh and consider the ramifications and impact this may have on our students. Again, imposing a vaccination mandate for all students, particularly students under the age of 18, may place some of those students in a situation where they may not have a choice based upon what their parents or their guardians choose to do or not do. So the board would be wise to consider that. The fourth recommendation is as follows. As advised by legal counsel, the Maine Department of Education rules make it clear pool testing must be voluntary for students. Therefore, I do not recommend imposing a testing requirement on students for pool testing. And so where does that leave us at present? As you know, most of our schools, with the exception of one, have been impacted in varying ways with COVID. And I tip my cap to our teachers, our nurses, our staff, our administrators who are doing everything they can to maintain the priority that I've been charged with by the board, and that is to keep schools open for in-person teaching and learning. But it's becoming increasingly difficult every single day. And so many of the things we're doing are commendable. I'm so proud of our kids and our staff, but we need to keep doing more, and we need the help of our communities. These are some additional recommendations, and these are some things that we have done before, but it is time to revisit them and re-implement some of the following. Providing vaccination clinics for students age 5 to 11. And I want to stop and I want to take a moment, and I would like to remind everybody to please be kind. It is not okay for people who may not agree with the vaccination opportunity for students to be reaching out to our nurses or our staff and with unkind words. And I'll be careful with that, but that is happening with our nurses and our community health centers. This is voluntary. We're distributing forms for parents to have an option. It's not a mandate. And I hope our communities can continue to know that our nurses and our staff are working very hard because they care about our students.
Mark, can I just put a finer point on that?
Please do.
If if you're in the community and then you do not like that we are offering a vaccination opportunity for students, please, I would just encourage anyone listening to reach out. I'm just speaking directly to the public here. Reach out to Mark or to me and direct your comments to us, because nurses at this moment are totally overworked in the schools, and any persons working in the schools are totally at they're at their capacity, and they do not need to be recipients of threats or unkind words or anything like that. So if you have comments, bring them to me or to Mark, please.
Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate that. So we will work collaboratively with the hospital, and I'm pleased to report those clinics are underway to be scheduled, and I'm hopeful that the first round of our students with parent and guardian permission will begin to be vaccinated prior to Thanksgiving or in that vicinity of time. Again, availability of the product will determine that, and we will work with our administrators and with the hospital to make sure that we're sensitive to the times of those clinics. Increasing physical distancing to the maximum extent possible. I want to also expand a little bit and say, many people have asked, what's it going to take to close a school? What does it take to close a school? What's the number? How many cases? It's important for folks to recognize, and these are not my words, the standard operating procedures and the guidelines of the CDC and MDOE were written with the intent of keeping schools open for in-person teaching and learning to the maximum extent possible. With any of the closures we've made to date, those decisions have not been made in a vacuum. They've been made in consultation with our administrators, our nurses, the CDC, and the MDOE. And each situation is different. Each situation is looked at differently. The data is looked at, where those cases came from. There are so many variables. So I want folks to know it's just not a matrix we go to with a number. And we do not make those decisions in a vacuum. And before any of those decisions are employed, I consult with the board chair. Increasing physical distancing to the maximum extent possible may be a variable that we can expand upon, but we may be limited in some of our spaces in classrooms. So again, to the maximum extent possible. And there also has to be some delineation between our K-8 and our 9 to 12 students and our buildings. We believe it is time, if buildings have not done so, to reinstate or reinstitute one-way traffic in hallways. That will help with flow, and it will also help with just interruptions or people bumping and just, I think, transitioning much more smoothly. It's also been recommended that we separate cohorts, pods at recess breaks and lunches. Kids want to be outside, they want to socialize, and we encourage them to do so when they're outside, but we need to be much more conscious about physical proximity and about how we can safely conduct those breaks and have our students have that activity. Additionally, resuming cohorts or pods for specials so that we can minimize any of the potential for spread within our schools. And certainly to continue to follow CDC and Maine Department of Education guidelines, guidance, and the SLP. I will speak briefly to athletics and activities and community use of our building by organizations, because that came up. And my recommendations are as follows with activities and athletics. I'm really proud of the fact that Bunky and his colleagues and the principals and the ADs have been networking. I'm really proud of my colleagues in Hancock County. The superintendents across our region are holding hands very, very well. I don't think we have any dispute on our guidelines for how we hold student activities, which are voluntary, within our county and within our region. And there are very specific protocols in place to include masking and mitigation techniques. Bunky has done a fine job networking with our coaches, and I think we can be really proud of our kids because our kids know these activities are very important to them. They want to be able to continue them, and in order to continue them, they know that they need to do these things so they don't lose that privilege. And it is a privilege, and I think they understand that. I have great faith in what the administrators have been able to do along with our nurses. And so I, as superintendent, would recommend that we continue the administrative overview of activities and athletics through our building principals, through our athletic administrator, as they're following the CDC, the MDLE, Maine Principals Association. All of those organizations are networked under one umbrella. Obviously, this is subject to change as conditions may warrant. If we have an outbreak, we have to close a building. This is not an open-ended or blank check. We are literally day-to-day on some of these pieces. And again, I think the gravity of the situation is people know where we're at. I believe they know where we're at, and they want to continue to have these activities. So I think what I'm saying is, if they know that, I think it's important that the greatest capacity for accountability comes from within. And I think our kids are demonstrating they're going to do the right thing. With that, community activities. I just want to say thanks to the organizations that have been patient with me and tolerant with me while they've waited for a decision, while they waited for the advisory group to complete its work. But we're at a point where I can no longer justify not allowing the use of our buildings or facilities safely if we're holding board meetings in public or we're having activities available for community use. For example, in Tremont, we have a community center. So I think it's very important that we're consistent. And so my recommendation is to allow the use of our buildings by community organizations as vetted through the building principals and the athletic administrator, provided these do not conflict with our teaching and learning activities during the day. They don't supplant any of our student activities or building use by our students or staff. And that those organizations follow all of the school required COVID mitigation guidelines that are in place, cleaning protocols, etc. That's a very broad overview, and I'll stop there, Jessica, unless you have questions, or I'm pleased to take any questions. And if anybody that served on that group that's here wants to add anything or address any questions. Bunky, did I cover athletics okay? Then, so I'll take any questions.
When you're So you recommend and advise the AOS board to consider all this. Are you making these decisions? Or are we?
Ultimately, I'm advising you as your superintendent. I don't make these decisions. I think if your question is, Lily, about a vaccination requirement or any requirements, that would be a board decision. But I would, if I may, I would, anything that we've been managing administratively, for example, events, athletics, activities, I would respectfully request that we continue down that path and allow administration to make those decisions.
So is this a report to us tonight, or are we going to be?
These are my recommendations, and it's within the board's, it's up to the board as to whether or not you want to consider any actions or additional, or you want to direct administration to do anything above and beyond.
We don't have any action items on the agenda, but a person could move any of these items, you know, if they so desire. To the extent, I mean, for example, we can't make a motion to mandate full testing. Because I think that's moving along, but, you know. Is your hand up, Brian? Your other, did you-
Are you done? So as these stand right now, what I think is going to happen is if we don't take any action on this, this is what you're going to go forward with, is the recommendations that you've made here. So in terms of something, just to use as an example, using the building for outside groups, you're going to move forward with that as opening it up. Anybody that comes in has to follow the COVID mitigation standards of the school system. There's nothing happening when students are here in the regular teaching and learning day. That's opened up to outside groups. They're only here after hours, and as long as it doesn't interfere with.
May I, Brett?
Sure.
So, I want, yes is the answer, but I want to make sure that if a group comes and asks for use, that's vetted through the principal, and I'm being really clear with the principals during the instructional day. I really can't envision any sort of a group coming from the outside. Our buildings are closed to visitors during the outside day. So
Right.
I just
So
want-
this would just be outside of the
Yes, sir.
regular teaching and
other-
learning hours. Yeah.
I think many of those requests, if they were, you know, above and beyond something that's already established, they would come to local boards.
So, okay, so there's no action on that would be the way in which it would go.
Yes.
So there were a few other things that we discussed within that group. And it had to do with that idea of mandating either pool testing or vaccines. And I don't think that anybody's going down the road of mandating vaccines from this board at this time. Mandated pool testing isn't something that we can do because of the way in which pool testing is going on. The difference that we talked about primarily within the group and some of how we talked about it is that really encompasses teaching and learning, right? And so your school day, and that's really where we were talking about not being able to mandate that anyone has it be in the pool testing or vaccinated. What is outside of that is the over and above stuff, the older extracurricular activities that are going on. And we are offering those opportunities to students. And with that, we ask a lot of students. We ask a lot in terms of their behavior standards and their academic standards to be allowed to have that privilege of participating in those activities. I don't think it's outside of anything terribly over and above what we're already asking of them to also opt into full testing and getting vaccinated if they want to participate in these extracurricular activities. And so simply requesting that if you want to be a part of any of these extracurricular activities, this is a standard that we're asking you to follow and expect of you as part of that extracurricular activity. And I think as a board, we could do that, and that's not mandating vaccines or pool testing. It's just simply saying that you are having this privilege. With this privilege comes certain responsibilities. There's lots of responsibilities. This is an additional responsibility that we want you to take on as part of this privilege of being able to do these extracurricular activities. I think that's the difference that we've mainly talked about relative to pool testing and vaccines.
And so it's not a mandate across the board. It wouldn't, I don't think, violate any of the state statutes relative to the pool testing. And that was the proposal that I had made. And you could do one or the other or both as a board, but that was where I landed with my thoughts on that.
Just like briefly,
Eliza and then Marie.
I was just curious about what is the DOE policy that prevents us from mandating pool testing? I wasn't clear on what
It must be
exactly.
voluntary.
That's
They'll
it's just
provide-
any
it's free,
testing at
but
all.
It must be voluntary.
Okay.
I think that's
So that would be
teaching
voluntary.
and learning.
Right, we'd have to.
And if it's a voluntary activity, and you're suggesting that it's baked into that, it's a voluntary activity. Like, what you're suggesting is that if you're choosing to do an activity. then- Okay.
Marie.
So I have a couple questions. So I was kind of on the same page as Lily, like I'm trying to figure out, if this is an action item, but it's recommendations, but if we don't do anything, it happens. I think that's a little confusing to me. So I want to ask for some clarifying questions about that. One is, in terms of elementary, middle school, may differ from high school, is that saying each building has the flexibility and the wherewithal to be able to consider circumstances or whatever is happening at their school to be able to in the ways in which they implement these recommendations, or does that mean something else? Does that, do you know what I'm saying? Like, I guess I'm asking, like, as you duly noted, different schools have different situations and each is unique. And maybe some of the outbreaks that were maybe closed one school, that was a very complicated set of decision-making and that happened at that school that you came to that conclusion. So in that same vein, like that's gonna be different at every school. So will principals still be able to, and will the staff that's working at those schools still be able to go through protocols that they need to make the decisions about maybe some of these things that may be too taxing or may add too much work, or maybe they want to do all of them. I guess I'm just confused about what that line is about the high school versus elementary schools having different things maybe or not.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's intended to be broad and it's intended to provide the latitude and the flexibility for these principals who may have different situations based upon staffing, building constraints, all of those, so that they can navigate that. And it was written that way intentionally.
Okay.
And yes, I would not make any of those decisions without consulting with a building principal and or nurse or their wellness or safety teams through the principal.
And I just want to respond. I think part of what, like, I don't think anything is on the table where, like, we would say in K through 8, if you're unvaccinated, you must opt into full testing or something. Like, I know that had been a concern that's on my way, but I don't think we can do that. And I don't think that's on the table right now.
I wasn't more, because I just wanted to understand like what that flexibility
Oh,
meant,
okay.
because I think it's confusing to me. So I just, obviously you're gonna have deeper discussions with building principals and
Yes.
staff. And they will be continue to be involved in this decision making. My other one is community groups in schools. Is that taxing on staff in the evening? I mean, I know that you said you can't with a straight face or whatever the phrase was, that on a safety note, that you couldn't say that anymore. But can we say that in terms of a staffing? I mean, janitorial services and other things. I don't know what other community groups, like, I don't know how community groups are actually using buildings at this point, or how I can't remember what was normal 2 years ago. But I guess I'm just wondering what that means in terms of how it's going to impact staffing and already really been.
We actually talked about that with the committee and there was discussion and again, Bunky or others that were there, Brian Robinson, jump in if I misspeak, but one of the concerns was our principals and our staff are already taxed. And are we in fact putting another thing on their plate? How are they going to oversee? Who's going to supervise? I forget who it was, but somebody brought up the fact that do we want to make sure that we continue the honor system where people have been doing the right thing because they know it's a privilege and they don't want to lose that privilege? And that was one part of the discussion. But you bring up a good point, and that is who's going to oversee and who's going to make sure that these spaces are clean, that people are properly masked, and we didn't get that far. What I have to do is sit down with our building principals, because some buildings, the truth is, have different resources than others to be able to navigate that. But there are some principals that do not have the bandwidth to be able to do that. And so are we going to have a stipend? Are we going to hire somebody to be able to oversee that? I don't have that answer yet, Marie. I don't, because we've only gotten to the point where we're just beginning to consider whether we're going to allow these groups to use them. If the answer is yes, then we have to go to the next step, say, okay, what are the requirements? How are we going to follow up to ensure that these standards have been met?
So I have one, can I just use my last question? I'll stop talking. My last question was, I'm confused about what Brian is suggesting. Either pool testing is voluntary or it's not. Is the potential rub that if it's connected to teaching and learning, it has to be voluntary, and we're questioning the legality that potentially if it's not connected to teaching and learning, then we can impose it? And are we going to have an answer about that anytime soon, or do we already know that and we're sort of still kind of push on it? Or
Well, I can tell you, this is what I know, and if you or anybody heard differently, but because we know public education is compulsory. And so that in and of itself says we cannot mandate pool testing.
I understand.
However, activities, athletics, those are not compulsory. Those are voluntary. So that, I believe, is where you were going, Brian, with that piece, because it's not compulsory. Can you in fact require?
Or only offer it to those that are in pool testing,
Yes.
or only offer it to
that was
those that are
checked
vaccinated.
legally?
Yes, and right, and I mean, anything can be challenged, but what we understand is we probably could implement that for non-compulsory activities.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
To add on to that, I think that it's important to, what Bunky and Matt said in our meeting, that as with fall sports, when people realized that they weren't in pool testing and they were going to potentially lose 10 days by being in close contact, they got into pool testing because they don't want to lose out on their sports. So it kind of comes with the territory that if you want to play sports and you want to stay here, this is kind of what you do.
No,
if you're not vaccinated.
I think it's great.
I think it-
Mark said one thing, then Tammy, and then I think, I want to put a time, I want to hear all the questions, but also we had a long agenda, so. yeah.
I didn't mention this, Robin, Sue, that you just sparked it, and I think it's important I say this. I think we all want, I believe we all want the same thing. We want our kids healthy, our schools open, our staff healthy, we want our activities. Is a mandate, in fact, going to get us further along? And I would submit to you that if we look at our data, we can be really proud of our data with our students and staff. What you just said largely, and Bunky oftentimes reminds me of the fact that the kids want to step up and do the right thing. They may not know what that right thing would be, all the time. So I think giving them the opportunity, incentivizing this, continuing to make sure that people know it's a privilege, I think we get more capacity and bandwidth doing that, as opposed to forcing people and mandating something. I worry, even though, what I believe personally, and the science is neither here nor there. What I do worry about is polarizing groups and having an unintended consequence of what we may want to consider to be a very positive piece. And that's why it's very difficult to walk this line. Thank you, Jessica.
Okay, Tammy and Lily,
I just-
and then Carrie.
I just wanted to respond to, I had a little, and I actually was already aware that said it in our community. I worry, I know you said it doesn't pass the test of like, well, we're having meetings. I'm uncomfortable for tonight. I promised my daughter, we have a newborn at home, that we were going to be in the auditorium, that people were going to be spaced apart. We're not. I'm an EMT. I just think if we're, in this time where we've had cases more than what we had originally back when COVID was killing everyone, but not us. I just think it sends a wrong message like, yeah, okay, you follow the guidelines and we're just going to open the school.
Well, we're supposed to be protecting our kids as much as possible. And not just our kids, but their families. And I think that people do understand that we're not there yet. We're not there yet as that everything can just be as it was. I really wish it was. I mean, our community Thanksgiving, they're pushing hard for it. And all it would take is a small outbreak in our community to wipe out a lot of people. And our kids would lose the ability for, you know, a week, 2 weeks, whatever it would take for all the families to get sick and get better. I guess, you know, that's just a small part of this whole equation.
Yes.
But I think it's one that we can say, you know, reach out to people and say, hey, you know what? We're asking you to be patient just a little while longer. Yes, it might be totally within your realm to ask, but like you said, putting it on the principals, is that adding more of a burden to them? Can we just ask our communities to say, hey, we're trying our best to keep the buildings during the school day as safe as possible. Can we not have people in the afternoons unless it's like, you know, the already set up athletics or whatever? I don't think it's asking too much of our community members to step up. We ask our kids to step up every day. We ask our teachers and nurses that work in the building to step up and do the best they can. I think we, you know, communities can say, hey, you know what? We can ride this a little bit longer. We're all tired, we're all overwhelmed, but in keeping our staff and the people that work there, why should we have to hire more people to come in and clean when the school is supposed to do so? I just, I'm having a little bit of an issue with that. I think everybody has the right to use the buildings, they're public buildings, but seeing what we're struggling with right now, let's keep our kids, let's keep our staff, let's keep our communities as safe as possible, especially within the buildings that they're supposed to be safe in. And I don't have a problem with saying, hey, people, think about this. You know, we can, you know, you might have to put it on the principal, but that's, to me, that's the thing, another burden. Yeah, we'll make the principal do that decision. And I know they all have really big shoulders, they've proven it, but I don't think it's fair.
Thank you, Tammy. Lily, and then Carrie, and then Bunky. Okay, Carrie, then Bunky.
So one thing that I noticed in the notes that were attached from Bunky was that wrestling is listed as high impact and is requiring vaccination. So that says to me that there probably are different levels of what we can and can't impose based on, you know, kind of the how dangerous the different activities are.
Can I clarify? That was
Yeah.
from the main, whatever, Principals Association. That was their requirement that they agreed on. And yes, I mean, we can absolutely, by the law, I think Melissa Huey was clear that we can implement vaccine requirements. The pool testing is a separate ball of wax. But it's a matter of whether we choose that we want to do that or not. But legally, we have to clear right to do that. Or, you know, we can do it for extracurriculars or for all students or whatever. You know, it's more about whether we think that's the right choice than our legal ability. So do you have something?
Can I?
So on
Okay.
that
Sorry.
case, at the management meeting last week, Sports Medicine Committee recommended that vaccination for wrestling. For those students, they should have that. If they want to participate, because they're going to be wrestling without a mask. The management committee voted unanimously to support that. That was on Tuesday. Today's Monday. Now it's going to be challenged. So that may be pushed to the wayside. We don't know yet. Everything changes every day, every minute. So I know at the meeting I was at today, the fall conference, that was brought up and it's being discussed again. And there's a sports medicine meeting tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, carry on.
And so then the other thing that I just wanted to ask about, and I want to put on my other hat for a second, which is Acadia Community Theater, which is one of the groups that would like to be able to be back in the building using the space for rehearsals and things like that. I know that we as an organization would have no problem saying to our actors and our tech people and everyone else, you have to be vaccinated to participate. This is a special event. We're asking a lot of our high school to allow us into the building. So we don't have a problem putting that kind of a mandate on our group. That's a special group asking for special access to the school. that to me is also on the same level as our spectators. I feel like it's that, I'm not sure if this is clear about what we would do with spectators for things like basketball or wrestling or whatever events are taking place within our buildings. But I think allowing the kids to participate is one thing, allowing the parents and other spectators in is a different level. And at that, I think that I am very much in favor of saying that if you want in the building for something like that, you need to be vaccinated. Because those people aren't going to be in pool testing. That's not offered to community members, it's offered in our schools. So to me, that's a line that we can draw. And I think it's important for us to give our community back some of these things. Basketball is such a big part of this community's identity in the wintertime and our community. I want people to be able to be in the building cheering for the team. I want the kids to have that support, but I think we have to maintain some levels to make that safe for everyone.
Marie, your question about the building, I can't speak for the middle schools, but I know there is a form that they have to use, outside groups have to use to fill out the expenses for extra work can be carried over to that group using it. At the high school, part of my job is building use after 2:30. So I communicate with the maintenance. We already currently have adult ed going on in here. This impact on us, I thought Acadia Community was going to come in this fall. For some reason, they didn't. But that stuff will all go through me. It'll be strongly communicated what the ins and outs are. As far as pool testing for athletes or vaccinations, I'm not in favor of that or mandating any of that. I think what if the statistics will show, out of 230 somewhat athletes and fall musicians, musical people, all but 23 was vaccinated. I don't know if the other 23, if they were enrolled in pool testing or not. I assume they were, because if you're in a close contact, you're out for 10 days, no question. And a lot of people know that now, so they're enrolling in pool testing. So if you want to call it shame, guilt, or whatever, I think that's will take care of all the vaccination and pool testing requirements that we're asking our people to do for extracurricular activity.
I think they call it FOMO now.
Yeah. The other thing I will say is that our regulations here at schools are going to be fully masked. Spectators come in, they're going to be fully masked, they're going to be worn correctly over the nose and mouth. If not, we will go up and politely say, you need help, you got to follow our rules and guidelines. The problem is going to be, though, when you go to other places, okay, what their mandates are going to be. I know we all say we're all going to be together in Hancock County. I'm worried about tomorrow night's school board meeting in Ellsworth High School. Because they've already moved it from City Hall to the gymnasium. And that tells me something's coming down. We go to our local Y to have swim meets, no spectators will be allowed. That's not my rule, that's their rule. We will do dual meets that allow us to do that, but every venue is different. We go to the University of Maine system. You have to be vaccinated, you have to have a negative test within 72 hours, and pool testing will not count. It has to be the PCR, or whatever you call them. You have to have those tests for parents to go in there and students. Anything over 250, everybody will wear a mask, competing, I learned today. But when we play some teams away, I go to Winslow, I don't want them masking this. A lot of schools now are going towards, when you're playing on the court, I'll talk basketball right now, when you're playing on the court, the people that are on the court, the 5, 10, 5-on-5, you don't have to wear a mask. People on the bench do. Everybody's all over the board. And no one wants to make the decision about making it mandated from the higher ups, because they don't want to take away local control. So it's going to be a mess. It's going to be stressful each and every day. I got to worry about what we do here, and my goal is to make sure everybody's safe when they come in. So that's the best we can do.
Quickly, on that, the same kind of customizable point about community events. John Eisenhower stepped out because he was wanting more space, but he just texted me, and I agree that each building has always been responsible for deciding whether or not we hold events, and they're, in Southwest, they've always been completely customizable. we don't have to pay, our janitors don't have to work, but often they want to because these organized events and activity, whatever the organization is, often pays them to clean. That would be a great way for them to make more money and to vet the job that's done. So I don't think that making the point that we're opening that up as an option means that we're going to have crowds rushing in, because it really still is, I think, should be a community decision. And, if the principals don't feel comfortable making that decision like they once did, bringing it to the board, then they can, harness the power of more people to help them. But I don't think, I feel like at this point, we know our mitigation strategies, we feel comfortable with them, and we can make that custom.
Unless there are more comments, I think we would move on from this in this discussion. And again, if board members have want to see action items moved forward about some of these points, please reach out about putting these on future agenda items for sure. Are there any final questions before we move on from this?
So if we move on, then this is, the recommendation is implemented.
Yes.
Okay.
This doesn't have any, if we were to say that this doesn't have any policy changes, like say if we were to implement an immunization requirement, then we would have to vote. That would have to be an action item, something like that, but this doesn't change.
No actual changes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right,
And the board can revisit this at any time.
right. And I think we should at our next meeting. Okay, moving on to Directors of Teaching and Learning. Lily and Rhonda, take it away.
Oh, I can't believe I'm talking about a learning management system after all these really heavy conversations. Did everybody have a chance to see the November note attached to the agenda? Okay. Just to give you guys some background, PowerSchool is our student information system. When we moved to a proficiency-based system, we were looking for a way to report on standards. So we had a first iteration of Mastery Connect. Some of you have been around, remember that. Didn't do what we needed it to do. PowerSchool is not big on development. What they do is they let other people develop and then buy and then integrate. And so in listening to all the sort of different competitors, they purchased Unified Classroom. And that's what we've been using for the past 5 years. And basically it's a grade book. And it's supposed to work in partnership with this thing called Learn. And I don't believe anybody knows what Learn is in the room, but it's basically Google Classroom as we know it, except it doesn't work very well. So we don't use it. We use Google Classroom. And it's done what we needed it to do, but it's clunky. It has multiple steps, and it's never been what we needed it to be. And one of the greatest complaints from teachers will be that Google Classroom works well. Kid can turn something in, I can score it, I can give feedback, but oh, why do I have to then open up the grade book and then double duty, create an assignment and put the scores in again? PowerSchool has basically purchased another product to replace Unified Classroom. It's called Schoology. And in this instance, it actually took the Learn and the Unified Classroom, made them work together. It looks more like Unified Classroom meets Google Classroom and gets it to talk better with each other. So why are we doing Schoology? Well, we don't really have a choice. Unified Classroom is going away. And we timed it up because we got a $30,000 grant to do a kickstart with this work now from the state, because the state knows a lot of districts have been struggling with this issue, and so they offered up some money to do it. So we're doing this pilot with teachers. It's a pilot, not in the sense that are we or aren't we going to do Schoology. It's a pilot in the sense of there's many ways we can set up Schoology, and now you have teacher input on how we should set it up to make it user-friendly and practical for your grade level, for your subject area, your disciplines, and so forth. So that team is going to begin their training on the 17th.
And we're gonna start meeting and talking about its capacities. Our goal really is to strengthen communication. I know when we were interviewed, that was, one of the big questions that was raised is how can we strengthen communication? PowerSchool doesn't seem to be the best mechanism for that. How can we improve that? We have that lens in approaching this work. So we're hoping to strengthen communication with this piece. I'm often asked, why do we use PowerSchool? Teachers get frustrated, especially during grading time. All of a sudden they'll do an update, right? I get it. I've been there actually multiple times. I did push, and Josh, you were in the room, aren't you? Oh, you're not. Wendell's here. Josh timed it right. Josh is back there. So I know we have an IT person on the board who's not here tonight. So I was gonna bring in Josh, but I pushed Josh, I pushed Elaine. I said, we're making this move. Why PowerSchool? And part of the communication to me was that in the initial decision-making in terms of how we're going to support our school information system, that it gave it a lot of flexibility to support the AOS needs. Now, I'm not going to be able to go into the details Elaine and Josh did, but I would direct you to ask them if you have more specific questions regarding, how it supports AOS measures, to please do so.
And then I just wanted to thank all the teachers and the families for parent-teacher conference week, the 2 weeks for the high school and the K-8 schools. It's an important time. It's an important time for us to be communicating and collaborating together for our students. So thank you for that. The other piece is that Julie mentioned that there were some things that we were asked to do when we were hired, and one of them is looking at the professional growth and evaluation system. So she and I have been reading and talking, and we are working on trying to create a system that is more manageable than the one that we have now. Even before COVID, the evaluation system was pretty unmanageable, and then you add COVID on top of that for our administrators, and they're spending at least a couple of days a week full COVID. It was a 6-day-a-week job before COVID. So yeah, it's just not 8 days in the week, and so something has to give. And one of the things the last legislators passed a law saying that we can hold on our evaluation system for this year. And that is one way that would be for holding for teachers and evaluations for principals. So we can do that to free up some time for our administrators.
Are there questions, thoughts for Rhonda and Kelly? Gail.
The evaluation hold, is that a recommendation, an offer, or a requirement?
The recommendation. Carrie?
So what does that mean for teachers who are newer to the schools and, in those first 3 years when
Yeah,
they need?
The people who are probationary and moving to continuing contract, they would still be getting feedback on their teaching, and they would be going through the evaluation process. You can't not do that for them.
Okay. And then do we
jump in?
Go ahead.
do we have any teachers who are requesting that kind of feedback that aren't in the probationary system? Because I do worry a little bit about teachers feeling like they're not getting the development that they need if they don't get an evaluation.
I don't know the answer to that. I do know that people are, when we've had professional development opportunities, they are signing up for them. So they are still looking at improving their practice and want to do what's right for their kids. But we need to narrow the focus.
Sure.
Just jump in. I think Ron and I talked about this, and a long time before, since I got on the board, I felt like this evaluation piece is something that's really important that we need to prioritize. But it's my perception, and it's again, not up to me, I'm just my observation in front, that this might not be the year.
Yeah,
to
yeah.
kind of double down on that, but that we need to have it in our, for sure, in our radar as to something that we want to be doing. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Lana, but from my conversation with you, we, by law, we'd be offering it to the probationary teachers. And if there are people like who are really needing assistance, we would be providing that to those people, when in those kind of more urgent circumstances, because you want to be seeing teachers succeed. It was that's maybe more clumsy, but you get my takeaway from the conversation. But the law frees us from the requirement, and so it doesn't mean that we can't, unlike last year, but it does free us from that requirement for this year. Because as we hear, so many with all the contact tracing and all that so forth, that there's this a real high level of being pretty overwhelmed in the building. Do you mind if I say something? Really, one thing that I have had conversations with people about, with Rhonda and Julie about, and some administrators about, is that for many of us, like if we're running businesses or we're running other things, it's like we can feel like, for some of us, our life is not at all back to normal. It's totally different. But for others of us, there's some semblance of normalcy. But for people who are, and I know you know this, but I'm just gonna say, I don't know if we all know this, that for some people who are running schools, it's actually, this year is much harder than last year because of all of this, pool testing, which is important, but the time it takes to do it, and the contact tracing, and the time it takes to do it, and the ever-changing SOPs related to that, some of that stuff. And so we kind of have to be, like, if we've identified we want to keep schools open, and that's our priority, then we have to kind of work down from there and figure out what we can actually, or the people actually doing work, which is not me. We have to figure out, like, we only need to direct people to do work that can't be actually, that's my perception about this, but sorry, I'm just dealing with it.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Moving on to updates from subcommittees, the superintendent search committee update. We met recently, when we'll meet again on November 17th with Eileen King, who I think is attempting to, I think there's, maybe what's today? Maybe it just was. Anyway, having an additional, it's to a couple of days, having an additional listening session to try to get more input. In the meantime, there has been a lot of talk about interim superintendents if we don't find the right person for through our search that we're undertaking. And I guess I want to say, one, we are undertaking a search for a permanent superintendent, and we hope we find that person. And that search is continuing. As a committee, we did talk, and we decided it would be good to have sort of a second track backup plan, that if we don't find that person, because we won't hire a person who's not right for our AOS. If we don't find that person, we will have a sort of backup track of having the option of hiring an interim for 1 or 2 years, and we would sort of, have that as this safety net. But I want to come right out and kill any rumors that we have hired a specific person as an interim. That has not happened. And I think it's critically important that we not engage in the, sort of speculation that if we want our next superintendent, whether they're an interim or a permanent person, to succeed. And a big part of that success is that we follow a process. And so, and that we follow the process with integrity, and that, we see it through. And so I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but I want to ask us all to refrain from speculations about a person being hired or whatever. No person has been hired. And and we will hope that our search process is successful, And if not, we will, entertain looking at a number of candidates for an interim, I would say, and picking who we think is the best one. Does that sound right, Brian and Susan and Darcy's not here tonight, but and Patrick's not here tonight. Do either of you have anything to add to that? Okay. And we will hopefully have, more to report out how that search process is going at the next meeting. And, I don't know, I'll just add one final point to that, which is that I intend to send out a letter to all the staff saying, who is on that committee and, and how that process is unfolding. But I want to encourage anyone, if they have questions about the process or they have feedback about, about what qualities they desire in the next superintendent, they are more than welcome at any time to email me or call me and share their feedback on all of yours. In case, if you're a member of the public or anyone in the here tonight and you missed a listening session or whatever, you have feedback, please reach out. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, moving on to middle school planning committee. Do you want me to talk about that? Or do you want to?
It doesn't matter. Again, you can.
The short answer is we're taking a hiatus because for the previous discussion about everyone being kind of maxed out, Marie and I, in our attempts to put together meetings, were feeling like, people did not have the capacity. We could not bring together enough people for our meeting, and that was a signal to us that we needed to lighten the load until things feel a little bit, easier. Do you have more than today?
No.
Okay. Reorganization planning committee. Who is
I mean, kind of on that note, I have not yet reached out Ingrid and Todd and Robin Sue and Carrie, Tom Reeves. So, Ingrid sent me the information and, it looks like things were boiled down to two major things to suss out: budgeting and employment, and that would be discussions with teachers, local boards, town government. I'm looking at a proposal to the board in January of 2022. I'm going to tell you right now. That's not happening. So once I have the capacity, which who knows when that is, I will get this rolling again. I mean, I did get the impression that, obviously a lot of thought went into this, but I don't want to lose any steam here with it. And so if anyone else wants to jump in and take the lead on it, I would be happy to. But long way of saying no.
okay. Thank you, Susan. So if you have a burning desire to talk about this committee, also, okay. Is that right? Anti-racism task force will meet for the first time this fall tomorrow at 3:30. And I think, quite a bit of work has already begun by students and staff, although, in terms of getting new members and so forth. But we'll see what happens at the meeting. Julie or Aaron, do you have anything to add to that?
I know everyone's excited to finally have their first meeting, so.
Yeah. Okay. We will report at the next meeting, hopefully with more to say about that. That brings us to discussion items and the fiscal year 23 budget. This should be simple and easy. Okay.
So in some, Nancy, jump in if I'm speaking here. She's right over there. I have not had the opportunity to sit down with Nancy to review all of the entities to include technology, business department. We have that scheduled for Monday, correct, Nancy? So this is typically the time where we're giving the board a sense of where we may have potential for carry forward. And again, this is the time where it's always unaudited. So it's a crystal ball. And Nancy, we don't have the preliminary yet, correct? Right. So it'll be forthcoming. It has to be because the AOS budget is the first one to go in December, correct, Nancy? Don't look for any major earth-shattering initiatives in that. Obviously, we're aware of the times we're in. So it's about us just making sure that we are all on the same page for our priorities. But again, I don't think you'll see any significant pieces in the AOS budget unless I'm missing something. Nancy, am I correct about that?
I think the only thing is the additional, there was some one position that was under the grant that would
Correct.
come into the budget.
Things that the board may have been aware of when they approved that may come into the budget, yes, but not new programming or new positions, correct? Right. That's all I have at this time, Jessica.
Are there questions?
Just to clarify, so are we gonna get a preliminary budget at the December 13th meeting and then vote on it by the end of the, when are we voting on that budget? Is that at the annual meeting the next week?
I believe that's the 15th,
Of December.
yes.
Yes, it is the 15th, and the meeting's on the 6th.
The meeting's on the 6th. Okay, got it.
Wait, I thought we.
No, I
decided
thought it was the
the
13th.
Meeting is on the 13th.
The high school meeting's on the 13th.
I'm just looking at the agenda.
Yeah.
Well, the 13th was the second Monday, that's why I said that, but maybe.
It comes on a Wednesday.
I'm trying to figure out what's the time frame between the
Right,
first time we see it and then when we vote on it. If anybody knows that.
I will caucus with Nancy first thing in the morning and meet with you.
Okay,
And make sure that the board has ample time to review the information.
so the budget will go out, yeah.
So I'll make that a priority tomorrow morning.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Can I say something
Yeah.
about the budget? I've been asking about some training for board members for, kind of how to understand the budget and what our roles are. And Mark has offered and Nancy have offered that there could be a board workshop coming up. And I've been asked to submit some dates that work for me, but I don't want to, be in a vacuum here. If there are other board members who are interested, I would love it if you would, get in touch with me as soon as possible and maybe we can compare calendars and see if there's a time when more than just I can meet with Nancy and Mark and do kind of a budget workshop for board members. So you can reach me on my board email.
It's just too bad you didn't know about it because the government listing thing that we just had, there was a whole space there for budgeting for board members. But you had to be joined in on that. So it was online for a while.
On the main school
Yeah,
management
but then
conference.
I think now it's gone by. today.
Oh, okay.
It was-
Okay.
Sorry, one more. Can I just piggyback? I know maybe it's future business, but in the vein of board training, at some point, maybe a couple of years ago, there was a discussion about a board handbook. Does anybody remember that? Or was it just me? Okay.
I remember that.
So, and I think that we have a lot of new school board members and a lot of us that have been here for a while that still haven't really, been able to delve into some of these more crucial questions about being a board member. I'm wondering if there's any progress on that. And if so, can we implement it? And if not, what's the next step? Go ahead.
There's, correct from wrong, Selena, there is a handbook. It is through the main School Boards Association. When you look at it, and we provide that to new and incoming members, when you look at it, you're gonna say, Mark, this is 10 years old. And yes, Selena, we've asked, and that's the latest and the greatest. Now, Marie, I don't know if yours is specific to our local and AOS.
I remember Todd Graham specifically asking years ago for us to be aware that there were a number of senior board members, not as an old, but just have been here around time, who are leaving. And we should have some specific guidance, collective wisdom, whatever you want to call it, that was directed towards how we operate. Is that, does that have, was that done? Does it have traction? And if not, what's the next step?
I've got this on it for future. agenda.
Thank you.
Okay, are there more, and I'll go through about the budget workshop. Very good.
Sure, yeah, thank you.
Are there more questions about the budget, or shall we move on? Other than this, but we do, is the meeting the 6th? I mean, I think that does matter. We do need to resolve that, because we don't want to have our meeting 2 days before the vote.
Right.
Are you talking about high school or all board?
Well, they're back to back, so, yeah.
I
Do
would
they
like-
have to be?
I would like to review the calendar with Selena and Nancy and then caucus with you in the morning. to
And
make
we'll
sure-
send out. Okay.
Yes,
Okay. Sounds good. Okay.
Nancy is, excuse me. Nancy.
Yes, Nancy.
For the need, the AOS, and then you would be doing your annual meeting, I believe it, wasn't it?
The 15th, yeah. I just didn't want to have them 2 days apart, so that,
Right.
yeah, okay, great. Okay, we'll talk in the morning.
Identify it.
Okay, then that brings us on to, policy committee, and I'll let Rhonda take that away, but I do think, I'll just, by way of introduction, say that on these, first and final reading policies, I am very hopeful that we can take action on these tonight, because some of them are things like remote participation in school board meetings with the COVID and other things. It's really, we really need to have policy in place, so I'm just putting that out there before we launch it. Take it away, Rhonda.
Sure, thank you. Many of these, or all of these, other than the tobacco use policies, are grounded in the new laws that came out earlier in the year. So our first policy to look at is the nepotism policy. And by LB 1323, we have the ability to have, it permits the spouse of school board members to serve as stipended employees or volunteers. The policy committee felt that they wanted to keep the policy the way that it is. There's that perception of impropriety. If we allow people on the board, their spouses, to collect a stipend.
Yes, and can I just jump in to say that there's an exception at the bottom of that policy that the board can approve exceptions to the policy if it's in the best interest of the school department. So there's a way, like on an outer island or something, if it's a deterrent that there isn't.
There, the intent of the law is in these small communities, there aren't a lot of people stepping up to do these in these roles. So they were trying to free up some people, but as Jessica said, there is that clause at the bottom. I think it's like the very end of the policy that kind of leaves it open for us. So we don't really need to change the policy in order to make an exception if it's what's in the best interest of kids. So that's just an, you don't have to do anything with that, right? We just say that we reviewed it.
Yeah.
So do we need action? Do we need to vote on any of these? And if we do, are we voting as a slate or are we voting individually?
I don't, the ones that we would need to, all of these are discussion items. So this like nepotism, we're not changing anything, so we don't need to take any action on it. When we get to the first and final readings, like the remote participation in workplace bullying, then I think probably we should vote on them separately because they're all quite, I mean, it doesn't matter to me, but yeah, we will need to vote on them.
Okay.
So the next group of policies we're looking at, this is the first reading of them. So the first one is the tobacco use and possession. It's ABC, and the policy committee would like to adopt the Drummond and Whitson policy and get rid of our policy. The biggest difference is that just in the language, the Drummond and Woodson policy is more updated with electronic smoking devices as part of it. And then the administrative procedures, ABCR, you can see they've added and will result in confiscation and disposal of tobacco products, and then using that language, electronic smoking devices. Instead of just confiscation and disposal of, there were a lot of places that the electronic smoking devices needed to get added in. And moving use from the bottom up to the top with possession. So possession and use have the same consequences, and then sale, distribution, and dispensing have the consequences on the bottom.
Yeah, and the other difference is that we didn't feel like requiring that, and then the police didn't want to be called
Right.
about like if we confiscate vapes or tobacco, they just wanted to know that they didn't want the right being called.
Yeah, so we added in the word may report rather than will report.
But it's been struck from the upper section.
Yes,
Right.
Yeah.
exactly. So we aren't taking any action on those people. Are there questions though about those, or otherwise we'll bring them back next time for any.
The next group of policies is administration of medications, JLCD, and it's JLCD, JLCDE, the form that goes home for parents to check off what medications they want their children to have, and JLCDR, medication on field trips. And so this policy, we're bringing it because there was a new law put in place that schools can have and administer Naxalone. Naxalone, am I saying that right? I always Narcan. They don't use the word Narcan. in the-
Naloxone is the generic.
Okay. But we would have that ability if the board would like to add that into the policy, to have that available for our nurses to administer if someone in a school building or on a field trip had an opioid overdose.
Are there any questions about that? Okay. I think that brings us to the first and final one.
So first and final, again, these are grounded in law, so that's why we're bringing them. We have new policy, BED. It's about remote participation in school board meetings. And Jessica, do you want to do, you said you wanted to do these one at a time?
Yeah, sure.
But it basically makes it so that we can offer remote participation by school board members. If you have remote participation by school board members, you also have to open it up to the public remotely, and there has to be a way for them to do public comment remotely.
And can I
Yeah.
think, all the town, like, since the state of emergency expired, for any municipal boards to be able to have a remote option, they have to pass this kind of policy. So like all the select boards have been passing them. And if you've read the language, you'll know that this preference is still for an in-person meeting. This is just to offer an option that we could legally still meet if they're, if we were going to a period of remote learning and couldn't be in the building or whatever happened. I think it would also allow a person to participate remotely, if some people were quarantining or whatever. I mean, you can look at the language. It requires the existence of emergency or other issue that requires the board to meet by remote things. So I would encourage us to pass this policy tonight. And after pending any questions and discussion. I would certainly entertain. Other questions? Carrie?
I'd like to make a motion that we pass BEB remote participation in school board meetings.
Any discussion? All in favor? I'm not voting, that's why I didn't. Okay. Did you get that, Susan? Okay. Moving on.
All right, our next policy is another new policy. It's on workplace bullying. And this one, we have a bullying policy that protects our students from bullying. This would protect our employees from bullying, from each other, from students, from.
And it responds to change in law, right?
Right.
Like we must.
We
have
are
policy.
required to have a policy.
Again, this is I think, the law requires us to pass this, so I would to have a policy about this, so pending any questions and discussion, I would certainly entertain the motion about this. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay. Child abuse and neglect reporting form.
So in the law, they are requiring DHHS to have an online portal for people to be able to report child abuse and neglect cases. On the other end of that, it needs to state in our school policy that we should report by telephone or the DHHS portal. So these three policies, JLF, JLFE, and JLFR, it's all just changing the language from reporting by just telephone to reporting by telephone and the portal.
Can we do those three in the slate then?
Yes.
So I will make a motion that we move the slate of JLF, JLFR, and just JLF.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Okay. Public's right to know, freedom of access.
So this is an existing policy. What the law did was change the fee per page from 25 cents to 10 cents. Not very often you see a reduction in cost. And then a fee of $25 per hour after the second hour of staff time from $10 for 1 hour. That's the only, yeah.
Yeah.
So moved. Second.
Okay, any discussion?
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
When you say the fee, is that the person who requests the information?
The person requesting the information is paid. Yeah. Okay, any more discussion? All in favor? Okay. Wow, that's smooth. Okay, moving on to action items. The first one is delete policy ABCA, tobacco policy for school employees and visitors. I think we're deleting that policy because it's irrelevant now that no one is smoking on the ground, so it's irrelevant. Is that right?
Right. School employees and visitors are included in the other policies, so we don't need to have a separate policy for them.
I would take a motion on. So moved. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay, the next one is the AOS 91 board commitment to equity and excellence, which we sent around last meeting. And I haven't heard any comments and questions, so I guess I would, pending any questions, I would accept the motion to adopt that commitment to equity and excellence. Or not, but are there questions about that? Okay, Carrie?
I'll make a motion that we approve the MDI RSS board commitment to equity and excellence. And I think this is really important work that we're doing and appreciate the opportunity to move forward with it.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Okay. Really tough going here. Okay, other business. I know we have budget workshop and board handbook has been put on there. Oh, no, did I skip one?
I don't even know.
Oh, I'm sorry. Membership reorganization committee. In my mind, we already talked about that, but you're right, it's an action item. So I'm not sure we're actually taking any action here because there's nothing to be action to be taken right now. Is that? Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Unless anyone else wants to join.
Yeah, I don't think that, I'm not aware of any action.
And we don't have anything to review as far as community members or other members that were being discussed.
Not
before the
right
committee
now.
Kind of shifted.
We're- Yeah, not until we
Yeah.
figure out what's going to. So, thank you, Selena. Other business, we have for budget workshop, board handbook, for, I mean, that's two for agenda items. Is there any other business?
Can I just make a comment?
Yes.
I just want to tell all the teachers that are left that I really appreciate your presence here tonight. And thank you so much for taking the time working with families to let us know how you feel.
Thank you all for coming. Okay, so we have those future agenda items, for sure have budget, Carrie.
So on the other business, I've had a couple of conversations about the question of whether we should consider extending our Thanksgiving break to include Monday and Tuesday to give our teachers a bit of a break and also to create a 10-day window for some of the cases that are currently active in our community to kind of settle themselves. Just something to throw out there.
Okay. So I did have the opportunity to have a conversation with the administrative team and that topic came up.
Yep.
And it seemed like there was a diversity of opinion about whether that would be a good idea or not. Some people are kind of like after, and some people are feeling like we should, some people thought it was a good idea, some people thought it should be post Thanksgiving. So I would feel hard pressed to make that decision right now. But I think I'm not sure what the point, but it's worth thinking about how we could figure out something. But yeah, I would feel after my conversation, I feel like I'm not sure how we would come to a decision about that right now. Because it seems like there were conflicting opinions about when and whether that's a good idea. But I would entertain.
In like a little snippet of discussion that I saw, there was somebody brought up a little bit of concern about like food insecurity being a big factor there that I wouldn't have thought of that first, but I think that's important. And but I also think the teachers are totally overwhelmed. So I heard in like a little snippet of discussion,
Yeah.
I heard both of those things. I feel the same way that you do. I don't know. There we go.
John?
Just that's the kind of thing that I want the administration to come to us with, taking on that, so we make it.
No. Can we add to a plate by saying if there's a recommendation about that? That we would approach this about that? Is that fair to say? Administration.
I think if the board's going to consider that, there's merit, you would need to consider obviously a calendar change. You would also be considering extending the school year per se for students and staff. So, and I also as much as there's merit, and we've done that before, it's likely we may be doing this for a while. We don't know the extent, and so I would just caution on doing anything prematurely. I think we need to continue to monitor the data as we're doing. And, I think we've shown that the principals are going to be able to continue to provide regular updates to both the local boards and to this board. So it'll be first and foremost on our minds. We can all remember what happened after the holiday break in December of last year, right?
So that brings up a question that I had in having these conversations, which was, is there still any kind of a mandate from the state, or does the state of emergency not being in effect then mean that the days would have to be made up?
That is correct. Unless a superintendent applies for a waiver, a commissioner. And again, the questions come up about what has happened with Connors Emerson and Tremont. We're not there yet. We're in the infancy here. We haven't broached that question, and there are districts across the state too. So we're not holding pattern, but you bring up a very good point. So you bring up a very good point, Carrie, and that is there is no state of emergency. And so we have to be really careful about what we do or do not do. We've contracted with our teachers for 184 days. So we just have to make sure that we're mindful of all of that information.
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to see the school year extended as much as they would love a break. But okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
So, on a funny sort of note, the reason I'm standing is I'm absolutely freezing. So that you know, all these windows are open. It's winter.
It's warmer over here lately.
Yeah, I'm cold. They'll be too.
I can feel it on my feet, but otherwise I'm not cold.
I'm moving around going, yeah.
Okay, so,
Sorry, just one more. Speaking of, when do we anticipate, I can't recall, when the first draft of the calendar will be for next year?
We've got an iteration thanks to Selena, but that conversation has not even begun with the administrators yet. I believe Rhonda, Julie from Rhonda, I think the first thing is to talk about the feedback we've received from staff and parents on any of the early release so far. And then I would think our target was early February. Am I wrong about that? We're talking February to bring something. Is that correct? So early February.
Okay. I would just say, we've had substantive changes for the last 3 years. We've therefore taken a really long time to book a calendar. I question whether or not that's, I mean, there's not enough time for us to do everything, clearly, but that's certainly something. I mean, I think a couple of years ago, there was also surveys that went out to teachers and staff about like Thanksgiving break, for instance, professional development days. So if we're gonna have the same rigor in terms of pulling feedback and pulling data, I just question whether or not that it's gonna be another long process. It's gonna push us out into like May or whenever the last time we booked our calendar. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know if the same process is gonna happen. So I'm just saying if it is, which it was good, and we need that feedback from our administrators and teachers, and community members. So I'm just throwing that out there. I know we're behind on everything, because everything's.
It's okay. No, it's important. And the sooner the better, because people need to be able to plan.
I don't see anyone else. So next meeting will be well, we think we'll verify that actually Monday, 6th November, and then Wednesday, December 15th. I think that's set and that's happening. 20th will be the annual meeting here at the high school. So that brings us to the opportunity to go into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 40560 contract negotiation. So I will take